Good morning, everyone. Thanks for a little bit more of your time before lunch. I'm here to talk about our programs for adherence with a behavioral core and the fact that adherence is a complex, multifaceted problem, and I think that's consistent with what just about every speaker has said. There's really no silver bullet. Each person has their own mix of reasons that get in their way, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about what we help do in that regard. For every disease, the standard of care includes multiple elements, taking your medicines, as well as a series of behavioral and self-care elements. And as we all know from our own experience and from family members and patients and customers, people struggle to adhere to their total therapies, their medicines and all the other elements as well. We offer software to help people build the habits to adhere. Obvious value of that: medicine adherence, removing prescribing barriers, health economics, and in some cases, complying with regulatory requirements. So I'm going to take you through some data on why people fail to adhere, what gets in the way of adherence, talk a bit about what a comprehensive solution for this complex problem looks like, look at a specific example for a woman named Mary and how adherence is an important element in her life and her health management, and then show you some data from two trials, two small clinical studies that we've run showing the effectiveness of our solutions on medicine adherence, as well as, in a second trial, broader cardiometabolic markers. So the question is, why don't people adhere to their therapies? It's complex. There's not one answer. I think we all know that intuitively. So the question is, what are the pieces of the answer? What are the elements that get in people's way and prevent them from doing what they know they should do, what their doctor has told them to do, what their family members probably want them to do, which is to manage the disease and its elements appropriately. This is some data from a Boston Consulting Group analysis that's a couple years old now, but I think still holds true. This is a fairly large-scale patient survey asking patients why they fail to take medicines as prescribed. And what I take away from this is that patients say there's a lot of different reasons why they fail to take medicines as prescribed. And that for each person, there's almost certainly multiple reasons that get in the way of taking medicines as prescribed. We supplemented that BCG research with some recent research that we did with physicians in the U.S. across a number of different primary care and specialty groups. And we asked physicians why their patients don't take medicines as prescribed. And physicians, with some slight differences versus what patients say, physicians say roughly the same reasons, and I take the same broad lesson away, which is that physicians think that patients struggle to adhere for a number of different reasons. And the basis of our business is that each of those reasons has a behavioral driver. So what do we mean by a behavioral driver? Well, we've taken the top 10 reasons mentioned by patients and physicians, and we've identified the likely behavioral drivers of each of those barriers or causes of non-adherence. So if you take the example of patient not understanding how to use the drug, well, almost certainly that's not a problem that the patient was never told. The patient was probably told by the physician, maybe by a nurse as well, maybe by a package insert. Maybe the patient also went online. Chances are at some point the patient came across the information about how to use the drug. And so it's probably not as simple as the patient has never been exposed to how to use the drug. But instead, there's a series of underlying issues that are likely getting in the way of the patient internalizing and acting on that information. How that person learns, processes information, that person's self-efficacy or self-confidence may be getting in the way, certain misconceptions may be overriding the information that they've read or been told. So it's not a simple problem that patient just needs another package insert. That patient needs a solution that's specific for him or her. And if we go through I'm not going to pause on each of these barriers, but if we go through the other barriers, each barrier has a series of likely or possible behavioral drivers. And so the core concept here is that simply reminding a patient or giving them an educational material or even giving them a discount card is unlikely to really get at the core behavioral challenges that are preventing adherence. And if we get down to what we might call some of the big three, forgetfulness, side effects, and cost, all three of those are undeniably issues in and of themselves. People do forget, people do have side effects, and cost is an issue. However, in each of those cases, our view is that first of all, there are ways people can reframe how they're thinking about those issues. So, for example, a side effect may be very burdensome, but if the person's able to reframe their perspective of the side effect in the context of the importance of managing the disease, the long-term benefit of that therapy, the thoughts and feelings that they have about the disease, there's a much better chance that they can put that side effect in its appropriate place. That instead of being overwhelming and getting in the way of their ability to manage this disease at all, it can become a side effect that is manageable. And perhaps there's other actions that can be taken to manage the side effect. Perhaps there's other behaviors. Perhaps talking openly to the physician can accomplish ways to manage the side effect. But the bottom line is that these are not impenetrable barriers. These are barriers that are based on behavioral drivers. So what do we do about those behavioral drivers, those complex, interlinked set of reasons why people fail to adhere? As I think we all know, on the left side of this slide, the pie chart, behavior is enormously important to health outcomes. This is a study reported at a conference about 2 years ago there's been a number of other studies that show similar data that essentially says that about 50% of health outcomes are driven by behavior. Do we take our medicines? What do we eat? What do we smoke? Do we get some exercise, et cetera? And if you look on the right side of this slide, you see 5 possible symptoms or elements of disease: physical, cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and environmental. So obviously a physical element can be solved, or at least solved in part, by a pharmacologic intervention. And that's obviously the business of our biopharma clients. Our business is supporting those other 4 elements: the cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and environmental elements. And fundamentally, our philosophy is that for adherence to be successful, adherence to medicine therapy, adherence to therapy defined more broadly, it needs to be a holistic and patient-centered approach. And this is a quote from a recent conference that reached that same conclusion that we use because they say it better than we could. But fundamentally, a tactical approach to adherence is unlikely to be successful. What does a holistic and patient-centered solution look like? In our mind, there's 4 primary components: helping people overcome the barriers to adherence specifically, helping family members, who we call co-patients, work more effectively as part of managing therapy, where appropriate and relevant, involving clinicians to some degree through reporting and other tools, as well as giving tools to patient and family to better coordinate care among healthcare providers. And then finally, addressing all those other elements of therapy adherence, truly understanding and internalizing the disease and the therapy, dealing with diet, exercise, emotions, other behaviors. So how do we do that? We use a comprehensive behavioral system that's based on an integration of behavioral science, or how people change behavior, and pedagogical science, or how people learn. And so we've built a software engine based on these modalities that for each person delivers a personalized program to help change cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and environmental dimensions. And in the case of Mary, I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. But before I go on to that, I want to make the point that thoughts and feelings are biochemistry. Thoughts and feelings are not things that sort of are irrelevant to health. Thoughts and feelings are core to who we are and actually what our brains look like. And there's been a fair bit of analysis done that different thoughts and feelings and changing thoughts and feelings actually change the way that the brain looks under an MRI. And so that's core to our business and our offering is that helping people change their thoughts and feelings about a disease and a therapy is not something that will sort of slip away. It's not something that will just last for a day or two, but it's a fundamental change. It's a core change in someone's brain chemistry and in how they are approaching that disease and therapy. And just briefly, who we are. We're based in Boston, in Faneuil Hall. Come visit us if you're in the Boston area. And we have small satellite offices here in Philadelphia as well as in London and Los Angeles. Our folks are a cross-functional team of psychologists, software, healthcare, and user engagement. And we're relatively young. We're nearing our third birthday. We were spun out of a company called the Curdan Group just under 3 years ago. So let's talk about Mary and Mary's experience managing her disease and therapy. Mary's an amalgamation of different patients. Obviously, we don't use a real patient in this example. But let's think of Mary as 68 years old. She has a husband, 2 grown children. She has been overweight most of her life. She has several chronic conditions. And her primary care physician recently initiated her on a difficult new therapy for one of her conditions. And as a result of that, the primary care physician told Mary about a program to help her start that difficult therapy and to help manage that condition more effectively. And so Mary decided to give it a try. And I've purposely not assigned a specific disease to this because I'd like each of you to maybe just think of a disease in your mind that's relevant to your business or maybe relevant to a family member. And as we go through this, see if it feels like it would apply in your circumstance. So when Mary is first introduced to this program through her physician, although she could have found out about it through other channels, other consumer-facing channels, Mary is skeptical. She already feels overwhelmed, has felt overwhelmed for years, perhaps decades, by managing these health conditions. She doesn't really see how another resource, another program is going to help her. She feels nagged. She feels nagged by her husband, who's always tried to get her to lose weight. She feels nagged by her primary care physician, who's always trying to get her to change different behaviors, to take her medicines. She really wishes she didn't have to deal with any of it. But she decides to give it a try, and so she answers a couple simple questions, which I'll show you in a minute, which ask her some questions about her thoughts, her feelings, her behaviors, and her environment. And while still skeptical, she decides that she's willing to see the results of her initial 5-minute investment. And one of the things she likes best about it is that there's no one across the dinner table or across the medical office who's sort of looking at her in a way that makes her feel that she's fat and she doesn't know how to manage her health and she's not in very good health. And instead, it's just her working on this and dealing with this herself.